What happens when the person you have been inside a relationship can no longer carry the person you are becoming? Not because the relationship is automatically wrong, not because the other person has suddenly become the enemy, not because one emotional weekend proves that everything must end, but because something inside you has begun rejecting a role that once helped you belong. Around the buck moon on 07/19/2026, the symbolic tension is not simply about emotion becoming louder. It is about identity becoming harder to suppress. The part of you that learned to stay quiet, keep the peace, anticipate every need, absorb every mood, or remain endlessly understandable may begin to feel exhausted by its own performance. You may notice irritation where you once felt patience, distance where you once felt duty, sadness where you expected gratitude. You may hear yourself saying, "I do not know what is wrong with me," when the deeper truth is that the identity you built to preserve connection may no longer fit the life growing inside you. That gap can feel frightening. Relationships often depend on more than love. They depend on patterns, roles, expectations, and silent agreements about who each person is allowed to be. When one identity begins changing, the relationship can feel unstable before anyone understands why. The buck moon does not predict a breakup, reunion, confrontation, or revelation. It gives us a symbolic point of reflection. A full moon has long represented visibility, not certainty. It illuminates what has already been forming. And what may be forming now is the recognition that you cannot keep calling self-abandonment loyalty simply because it has been your most familiar way of loving. You may already feel this in small moments. A conversation ends, but your body stays tense. Someone asks what is wrong, and you say, "Nothing," because explaining the truth feels too complicated. You agree to something before checking whether you actually have the capacity. You offer reassurance while privately wondering who reassures you. You continue showing up as the dependable one, the forgiving one, the calm one, or the one who never needs too much. Then resentment appears. Not dramatic resentment, quiet resentment. The kind that hides beneath helpfulness. The kind that sounds like a tired sigh, a delayed reply, a loss of enthusiasm, or a sudden need to be alone. The kind that makes you question whether you have become cold, when you may simply be depleted. This is painful because the role you are outgrowing may also be the role that once protected you. Perhaps being easygoing protected you from rejection. Perhaps being useful made you feel valuable. Perhaps being emotionally available kept people close. Perhaps being agreeable reduced conflict in a home where conflict felt dangerous. Perhaps being the strong one gave you an identity when vulnerability seemed too risky. Those roles were not created because you were weak. They were intelligent responses to what belonging once required. The problem begins when an old survival identity continues running a relationship that now requires a more honest version of you. You may know how to be needed, but not how to be known. You may know how to maintain harmony, but not how to reveal disappointment. You may know how to forgive quickly, but not how to insist that repair actually happen. You may know how to support another person's growth while quietly postponing your own. When that pattern becomes visible, shame often arrives before clarity. You may blame yourself for changing. You may wonder why the things you tolerated before suddenly feel unbearable. You may accuse yourself of being selfish, impatient, demanding, or emotionally inconsistent. You may compare the person you are now to the person who could once carry everything without complaint. But being able to carry something does not mean you were meant to carry it forever. Capacity is not consent. Endurance is not alignment. Familiarity is not proof that a pattern is healthy. There are seasons when the deepest relationship tension is not between two people. It is between two versions of the same person. One version still believes connection must be earned through accommodation. The other is beginning to understand that real connection must have enough room for truth. This is the timing language underneath identity phases and self-concept shifts. Human beings do not change only by acquiring new habits. We change by losing identification with roles that once organized our lives. Before a new identity feels natural, the old identity begins feeling restrictive. There is often an uncomfortable middle period where you can no longer live convincingly as who you were, but you do not yet feel secure as who you are becoming. In relationships, that middle period is especially intense because other people may still be relating to the version of you they understand. They may expect the old answer, the old availability, the old level of access, the old willingness to smooth things over, the old silence after disappointment. They may not be consciously trying to hold you back. They may simply be responding to the pattern the relationship has taught them to expect. And you may participate in maintaining that pattern, even while resenting it. You may continue saying yes, because saying no would reveal how much has changed. You may continue performing closeness, because admitting distance would require a real conversation. You may keep offering the old version of yourself, because you are afraid the new version will not be welcomed. This is why identity change can feel lonely before it feels liberating. The full moon symbolism associated with the buck moon offers a useful reflective image here. Lunar wisdom has been used across cultures as a way of observing rhythm, visibility, repetition, and change. The moon does not create every human emotion, and it does not dictate relationship outcomes. Its phases became meaningful because people watched recurring changes in light and used them as reminders that what appears fixed is often moving through a cycle. The full moon is a moment of maximum reflected light. Symbolically, it can represent what is difficult to ignore. The buck moon received its seasonal name through observations of male deer growing new antlers during this part of the year. That image is not a personal prophecy. It is a metaphor of visible renewal, new growth emerging from the same body that carried an earlier form. The antler does not apologize for changing shape. Human identity, however, often does. Across history, communities have marked the transition from one social identity into another through rites of passage. A child became recognized as an adult. An apprentice became a craftsperson. A single person entered a formal union. A mourner moved through communal rituals after loss. These traditions understood that identity change required acknowledgement, because a person could not simply step into a new role while every surrounding expectation remained untouched. Modern life often removes the ritual but keeps the transition. You may be becoming someone new without language, ceremony, or communal recognition. The people around you may see only changed behavior. They may not see the internal process underneath it. They may interpret your boundaries as rejection, your silence as punishment, your independence as distance, or your questions as disloyalty. This is where conflict becomes more than disagreement. It becomes a negotiation over identity. Consider the person who has always been the emotional caretaker in a family. They remember birthdays, mediate arguments, check on everyone, and absorb the discomfort no one else wants to hold. For years, this role may bring praise. They are called mature, dependable, generous, and strong. Then one day, they stop answering every crisis immediately. The family may not celebrate the new boundary. They may call the person distant. They may say they have changed, and they are right. The person has changed. The real question is whether the old system allowed them to remain whole. Or consider a romantic relationship in which one partner has always avoided conflict. They agree quickly, soften every concern, and accept partial repair because emotional tension makes them anxious. The relationship appears peaceful, but the peace is being financed by one person's silence. As that person develops a stronger sense of self, they begin naming what hurts. Their partner may say, "We never had these problems before." But the problems may have existed for years. What did not exist was permission to speak about them. The new conflict is not necessarily evidence that the relationship has become worse. It may be evidence that the relationship is finally encountering the truth it previously avoided. Another example appears in adult friendships. A friendship may have formed during a period when both people bonded through shared wounds, constant venting, or mutual instability. Over time, one person begins healing. Their interests change. Their availability changes. They no longer want every conversation to revolve around crisis. The other person may feel abandoned, even when no cruelty has occurred. The friendship was not built only around affection. It was also organized around a shared identity. When one person leaves that identity, both people must discover whether the relationship has enough substance to evolve. Public life offers the same pattern. Leaders, artists, athletes, and cultural figures are often punished when their identity changes beyond the role audiences assign them. A performer known for one style tries something new and is accused of betraying their roots. An athlete retires and struggles to answer who they are without competition. A public advocate changes their position after new experience and is accused of inconsistency. Society frequently rewards growth in theory, but resists it in practice. People want transformation as long as it does not inconvenience the identities they have already assigned. That is why your relationship tension may not be solved by asking whether you still care. Care is only part of the question. You must also ask whether the relationship can meet the version of you that is becoming more honest. Can you be loved without overfunctioning? Can you be respected when you are not useful? Can you tell the truth before resentment has to tell it for you? Can the relationship survive your boundaries, your changing priorities, your need for reciprocity, and your refusal to keep performing emotional labor that was never equally shared? These questions are not instructions to leave. They are invitations to see. Identity phases are not always about ending relationships. Often, they are about ending unconscious contracts inside relationships. The contract that says you must never disappoint anyone. The contract that says love means unlimited access. The contract that says conflict is dangerous. The contract that says your needs should remain smaller than the needs of the person beside you. An old contract may expire before the relationship does. But when it expires, the relationship must be renegotiated. This is where many people become tempted to make immediate, dramatic decisions. Emotional sensitivity rises, and everything feels urgent. Yet visibility is not the same as instruction. Seeing a pattern clearly does not require reacting impulsively. It requires enough steadiness to understand what the pattern is asking you to acknowledge. On 07/19/2026, use the buck moon as a pause rather than a verdict. Notice where your body tightens during ordinary interactions, not to diagnose the relationship, but to identify where your internal truth and external behavior have separated. Tension often appears when the mouth says yes, while the self says no. Fatigue often increases when a person keeps maintaining an identity they have already outgrown. Listen for the phrases you repeat automatically. I do not want to make this a big deal. They have a lot going on. It is easier if I handle it. I should be more understanding. I do not want them to think I have changed. These statements are not always wrong. Compassion matters. Context matters. Flexibility matters. But when the same phrases repeatedly silence your experience, they become clues. They reveal where empathy for another person has stopped including empathy for you. Begin separating the relationship from the role you perform inside it. You can love someone and question the role you have occupied. You can value a friendship and admit that its current rhythm is draining. You can honor your family and refuse to remain the permanent emotional manager. You can stay present without staying available for every demand. This distinction restores choice. Without it, people often believe they have only two options: continue the old pattern or abandon the entire relationship. But there is another possibility. You can bring a new identity into the relationship and allow reality to show whether the connection can adapt. That may sound like saying, I cannot keep resolving every conflict for both of us. It may sound like, I care about you, but I need time before I answer. It may sound like, when I say I am hurt, I need the conversation to remain with that truth, instead of becoming a debate about whether I should feel it. It may sound like, I want this relationship, but I do not want the version of it that requires me to disappear. The goal is a not perfect language. The goal is congruence. Congruence means your behavior begins matching what you know internally. It means your yes becomes more honest. Your no becomes less apologetic, and your care becomes less entangled with fear. It means you stop using generosity to negotiate for safety. You may also need to grieve. There is grief in realizing that some people benefited from a version of you that was exhausted. There is grief in understanding that your most celebrated traits may have been adaptations. There is grief in seeing how long you called a role your personality because you had forgotten who you were before the role became necessary. Do not rush that grief into empowerment. Sit with the loss of the old self. Thank the version of you that kept the peace, survived the uncertainty, protected the bond, and carried what seemed necessary. That version deserves compassion, not contempt. Transformation becomes unstable when people shame the selves they are leaving behind. Your old identity was not stupid. It was trying to keep you connected. It may simply be using an outdated map. You can honor what it protected without allowing it to govern what comes next. Then observe the response of the relationship. Healthy relationships may feel tension when one person changes, but they contain some capacity for curiosity. The other person may not understand immediately. They may feel confused, disappointed, or defensive. Yet over time, they become willing to hear, adjust, and participate in building a new pattern. Unhealthy systems demand that you return to your assigned role. They may punish boundaries, mock your growth, increase guilt, withdraw affection, or frame your self-respect as betrayal. They may insist that the only acceptable version of you is the version that costs them nothing. Pay attention to patterns rather than isolated reactions. One difficult conversation does not define a relationship, but repeated refusal to recognize your humanity is information. Repeated repair is also information. Accountability is information. Curiosity is information. The willingness to create new agreements is information. Let behavior become clearer than hope alone. You do not have to force a conclusion during an emotionally charged moment. You can gather evidence. You can slow down. You can notice whether the relationship makes room for your emerging identity or continually pressures you to return to the old one. This is sustainability over urgency. It is the difference between using emotion as a command and using emotion as a messenger. The buck moon can be a reminder that growth becomes visible before it becomes comfortable. New antlers are living tissue while they develop. They are sensitive. Growth itself can feel tender. The emerging self is often more emotionally reactive, not because it is weak, but because it has not yet learned how to stand without the old protections. Be gentle with that tenderness. You may over-explain a boundary because you are still learning to trust it. You may feel guilty after telling the truth. You may miss the familiar role even though it depleted you. You may question whether you are becoming difficult when you are simply becoming more defined. This does not mean every new impulse is automatically wise. Identity change also requires humility. Sometimes what feels like liberation is avoidance. Sometimes a boundary is actually a wall. Sometimes protecting my peace becomes a way to escape necessary accountability. The emerging self must be honest enough to examine its own behavior too. Ask whether you are becoming more truthful or merely more defended. Ask whether your boundary creates clarity or punishment. Ask whether you are communicating your change or expecting others to read it without conversation. Ask whether you are allowing people the opportunity to meet the new version of you before assuming they never could. Self-respect and self-examination belong together. The purpose is not to become untouchable. The purpose is to become present without abandoning yourself. Imagine the difference. Before, you entered conversations already preparing to surrender. You monitored the other person's mood. You edited your needs. You offered solutions before your feelings had even been heard. You called the absence of conflict peace, even while your body carried the argument. After, you remain connected to yourself while staying in connection with another person. You listen without disappearing. You speak without turning every truth into an accusation. You allow disappointment without treating it as proof that love is gone. You understand that someone's discomfort with your boundary does not automatically make the boundary cruel. Before, you needed everyone to understand your change immediately. After, you trust that clarity does not require instant agreement. Before, your identity depended on being chosen. After, your self-respect shapes what being chosen must include. That internal transformation may not produce a neat external outcome. Some relationships adapt. Some reveal their limits. Some become more honest. Some become more distant. But your authority no longer depends on controlling which response occurs. It begins with recognizing the phase. You are not necessarily losing your ability to love. You may be losing your willingness to confuse love with self-erasure. You are not necessarily becoming detached. You may be learning that connection without reciprocity is not intimacy. You are not necessarily destroying the peace. You may be discovering that silence was never the same as peace. The identity you are shedding may have kept relationships functioning. The identity emerging now wants to know whether those relationships can become real. So ask yourself this: where in your relationships are you still performing an old role because you fear that the truth of who you are becoming may change what others expect from you? The relationships meant to meet your growth will not require you to keep resurrecting the identity your soul has already released. Share this with someone who has been blaming themselves for changing inside a relationship. Subscribe for more Prophecy Pulse teachings on timing, cycles, identity, and the patterns shaping human connection. This buck moon gives language to a collective pattern, but your personal timing carries its own signal. To explore that signal more deeply, follow the link in the description. This is the Prophecy Pulse,